Welcome everyone to the Cresta San Francisco office. Thank you all for joining. Tonight we're going to dive into the state of AI, and what we have here is a panel of incredible founders that are really at the forefront of building voice applications and infrastructure. And from a venture perspective, the last year and a half in voice has been crazy. Actually, I found a stat just before this, which I always kind of felt, but seeing the stat made me feel validated, which was in the last year, the amount of venture funding in voice has actually increased sevenfold. Last year was about just over $2 billion. 2 years before that, it was under 300 million, right? So there's just a lot of activity going on in this space. And I think viscerally, we all see the improvements that are occurring in voice applications. So tonight, we're going to dive deep into why that's the case and have a pretty technical conversation about what it means to be building in voice and what really we have to look forward to. So with that, I'm going to let the speakers introduce themselves. Karan, I'll start with you and hand you the mic, and we're going to do a quick introduction, and then we're going to have some fun questions. And I want to prepare the audience that we are going to have Q&A at the end. So think about some questions that you might want to propose.
Hey folks, really great to be here. Thanks to the Cresta folks for hosting this event. Excited to talk about voice AI today. But I'm Karan. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of a company called Cartesia. We are in the model part of the voice AI stack. So we build voice AI models that are low latency and accurate so that other folks can go build verticalized applications on top to solve challenges in different industries and domains. We are a very research-oriented company, so we also, outside of voice AI, are focused on building long context models that can reason and understand information as it flows in through interaction and then learn from that to improve. So that's some of the work that we do on research.
All right. Hi there. Thank you for coming today. I'm Daniel. I'm the CTO here at Cresta, and hopefully we'll have a pretty exciting discussion for you and hopefully give you some insights, what kind of experience we really saw in reality. I'm not really going to talk about Cresta itself. Lillian will do that quite a bit later. So I'll mostly leave it here, but thank you all for coming, and I hope it's going to be a useful discussion for you, and we can give you some insights that help you in your day-to-day and all of the things you are working on.
Hey everyone, I'm Brooke. I'm the founder of Coval, and we build simulation and evaluation for voice agents. So helping you to understand how well your agent is doing in production, where things are going wrong, being able to do labeling at scale, and then feed that back into auto evals. My background is from Waymo, so I led our evaluation infrastructure team at Waymo that was responsible for all of our developer tools. So how do you launch and run really large simulation jobs to be able to understand the performance? And so now we're taking a lot of those learnings and applying them to how we run evals for like large enterprises who are deploying voice agents at scale. On the side, we also do benchmarks, so you can check out actually Cartesia's models on all of our benchmarks and see like which models you should be using at every layer in the stack.
My name is Kwindla and Kramer. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Daily. We make developer tools and infrastructure for real-time audio, video, and AI. We're also the team behind an open source framework called Pipecast, which is the most widely used tooling for building things like voice agents and multimedia copilots today. I've been doing networking stuff my whole career, which is 25 years or so at this point. And when GPT-4 came out, it was just a light bulb moment for me that all the stuff I liked building could now let you talk to computers in new ways as well as talk to people. So I've spent most of my time the last 2 years thinking about how we build sort of from the network layer up into the stack, the tooling you need to be successful at talking to computers with your voice.
Excellent. So we're going to start with a round robin, and we'll start off with you, Karan. What in voice AI is hype versus real?
On the hype side, I would say there's still a lot of work to do on voice experience, I think, in terms of like general fatigue that people feel talking to voice agents. I think that's been an area where we constantly get a lot of feedback from our customers. How can you build an experience that feels natural, seamless, but also feels like something you actually want to talk to for a long period of time? And obviously varies by applications, right? Like there might be some applications where you want to be, getting a refund, and so you're very incentivized to talk to the agent. But in many applications, it's also about making the experience better. I think what's real is that you can actually build agents that can actually do productive work on the phone. And for many medium to short conversations, these things actually work in production. And it's not just, made up and like voice AI is going to solve everything. But at the same time, there's like a non-trivial number of use cases that are getting solved, and those are real. And I also think there's a huge opportunity globally for this. So multilingual, I think, is going to be a really big market for voice AI.
Let me kind of reiterate the same point on what's real. What is real is that we can actually build useful, good voice experience that solve certain tasks, in particular very well-constrained tasks very well, and at the same time that are kind of nice to talk to. On the other hand, it's not the case that you can just deploy a voice agent that solves everything. All of the use cases, for example, you have in your contact center just works. There's still a lot of pain involved, and you have to very much refine the voice agent for the specific use cases. Even the best LLM just doesn't make it work out of the box. There's a lot of pain involved, both on the infrastructure side to actually fully deploy it, and on the modeling side to really make it work how your customer wants it to work. That's partly in a like ML problem, but it's also partly a problem of how do you even discover what the AI agent, voice agent is supposed to do. And usually contact center, like folks in the contact center, they don't really know what's going on in their contact center in sufficient detail to really build a voice agent that does what they want to do.
Yeah, I think what's real is how easy it is to build voice agents today, get a voice agent up and running. I think there's a lot of platforms out there that are very low code that you can even just like type in a prompt to get your voice agent. Then there's, I think, other platform. Actually, Cartesia just launched their voice platform. And I think, actually, I haven't explored it as much, but I would say it probably is more self-serve. And then I think you have everything to Pipecat, which is like incredibly powerful, and you can build really complex autonomous systems on it. And so that's very real. I think approaching it systematically, definitely, it still needs to be built and scaled and tested in order to deploy into production.
My hot take is that voice AI is significantly underhyped right now. We have lots of customers deploying in production at scale for things like call center workflows, answering the phone for small business, outbound calling for really useful use cases like collecting information before a healthcare appointment. And I don't disagree with anything anybody said that there are challenges. But if we stopped all progress on models, all progress on tooling, maybe even all progress on evals frameworks for 2 years, there would be plenty of work to do on diffusion of best practices to get this stuff out into the world. And there are going to be several $1 billion of value creation, however you calculate it, revenue generated, deflection rate ROI in call centers, whatever, over the next 2 years, even not counting the incredible pace of progress on models and on tooling and on the ability of somebody like Cresta to really deliver to the broadest possible range of customers. So I don't think there's anything that's hype. I think everything is real, and we just have to get this stuff out into people's hands.
Great. So the next topic we'll go into is evals. And Brooke, I'm going to start with you and then Karan. So what does the future of evaluating voice look like? And, if you can predict what best-in-class evals for voice are down the line, paint a picture of what that looks like for us.
Yeah, I think to Quinn's point, there's already so much that you can do with existing infrastructure. And so just like putting those to the test of being able to run audio processing, being able to run like consistency analysis, being able to say whether or not follow the workflow, did it call the right tools, LLM as a judge that's correlated with human judgment. But even beyond that, I think long-term, like how do you make this really fast, cheap, and scalable so that you can run really large-scale evaluations? I think at Waymo, we ran really extremely large-scale evaluations, and that's what allows you to start to see overall probabilities. And so that's what we're driving towards at Coval, is how do you really scale large-scale cheap evaluations?
I think just to add on to that, I think we've talked about this before too, but We sort of want to pair, at least at Cartesia, because we deal with models, we want to pair like automated evals that are cheap, scalable, give you a lot of good signal, but often need some interpretation. All metrics are wrong in some way, and you have to be careful about them. With human judgment, because voice is such a human thing, and you want to be able to figure out like, if you're deploying an experience, like the best way to understand it, whether it's good or not, is whether it passes your, smell test first, and then obviously then scale that out to build like real evals. I think there's also research problems here, right? Like there's actually not very good models that can detect things like emotions or like do reward modeling for different signals inside speech. And so actually, like if you take off the shelf systems for that, you often get somewhat brittle but usable metrics. And so there's a lot of work to be done to improve those models and just make them accessible so that you can start building suites of metrics that are accurate.
I think one thing to add there too is that like each layer of the stack is different. So I think transcription is probably the easiest to eval because it's like, did it transcribe it? You can have some ground truth. Obviously harder in production, and then LLMs, you can have more like, did it follow the instructions? Did it follow some workflow? I think TTS is probably the more like art than science piece of this, where different voices can have different business impacts on your users. And so I think that's where it's really helpful to look at key business metrics like conversion or retention rate or deflection, et cetera, to see like what do your users, because that might be very different if you're like more an older crowd versus younger crowd or like different demographics.
One quick thing I'll add is one thing we're trying to build is a better understanding of voice experience, like a holistic understanding from a synthesis perspective, because it has such a big impact on the experience of the application. And then you have to scale that across every geographic, because we're building these models that can support 40 plus languages. And so you have to go and solve that problem again and again with cultural context in every new geography. So it does not scale sublinearly in the number of territories. It scales linearly. It's a lot of work.
And that's actually my next question. You said the word scale, and then you also mentioned simulation. So Daniel, I'm going to go to you here. Like, how do you test voice agents at true scale? And like, what are the methodologies that you can use there? And I'll start with Daniel, then go to Brooke.
I'm going to start a bit kind of more basic. Before you can even scale, you have to do eval at all. Like the first step is you have to have some way to like do the gradient descent. You have to have some ground truth, even if you just start with some very basic like single turn evaluation, where in this turn it's supposed to call this tool, and you just check this with deterministic code. You have to start with that. You can't just fly blind and do it based on vibes. That's maybe the first starting point. And then going from there, before you have the real production data, the good way to scale is to just let LLMs give you some ideas, create some test cases that sound reasonable and that can then be put in like a simulator. You don't even need to start with voice simulation. You can just simulate the core LLM intelligence piece and see how it behaves and performs. But ideally, you then scale to the voice simulation. But then there's often a question of cost and how long it actually takes to simulate. But that's usually then still not enough, because whatever the LLM created for you, whatever test case it created, it does not need to like align with the real world, what actually happens in the real world. And in fact, it never does. So what you really then need to really scale it is have kind of a more full-fledged feedback loop where you can actually consume what happened in real production and then automatically convert this into test cases. Kind of the long-term vision is kind of I've heard the term complaint-driven development, where you just the human just provides like feedback, suggestions, opinions, what didn't go well in this situation, and then it automatically feeds back into evaluation and improvements. But that's kind of more the long-term vision. But in order to really scale to real production use cases, it's going to be necessary eventually.
Yeah, I think an interesting corollary here is like how in self-driving we actually there's many models at play in the system. And so actually when you're testing, you might not test all of them end to end, but actually individual models at any given point. So you might just test the planning capabilities or just test the sensing capabilities of the software. And I think the true is the same for voice. So you don't necessarily at the very base level, like when you're choosing your models for TTS, STT, LLMs, you might just want to do like what we call local benchmarking and isolation of like which models are working the best for your data. And then actually stringing those together, you might just need text-to-text simulation, or even more basic than that, like are you calling the right tools and is your tool doing the right thing? So more just like unit tests. Good old Python will do the trick. And then running text-to-text simulations to get, am I following the workflow? Am I calling the right tool calls? Is my conversation flowing? And then doing end-to-end simulation for like voice simulation. So being able to do timing, like I think one important part about voice is like, why not just use text-to-text simulation? Is that like timing is really important. So even if you say all the right things, but you say them really quickly or really slowly, that makes a big difference. Or if you accidentally scream them, sometimes that happens. It happens to all of us. And I think the last bit is like really realistic simulation. So background noise, different accents, making it really realistic voices that you would hear in production. I think oftentimes we get the feedback of like, well, that's not what it sounds like. My users don't sound like that. But you don't actually need super realistic simulations for everything, right? If you're just testing your interruptivity or your like your timing, you don't need all of those fancy things. And I think, again, in self-driving, you don't necessarily need hyper-realistic video simulation to be able to test like, can I make the right plan to go forward? So I think it's the same with voice.
Kwindla, I'm going to start with you, and then Daniel, I'll go back to you. What are the biggest challenges in taking a voice app from demo to production?
I'm just going to break off a little piece of that because I had a conversation twice today with two different groups about the difference between demoing to executives and then delivering a voice agent to production. Apparently, Steve Jobs used to say that to his teams, if you have data, we'll make a decision based on the data. If you don't, I'm going to make the decision. And that's a real dynamic when you go into a big company and you demo the voice agent. So part of the challenge is setting up the whole sales cycle so that you can get through all the gates in an enterprise sales cycle and deliver at the end of that process what you need to deliver that is actually going to make your customer successful. Surprisingly challenging, but I think it's always the case in a new arc of technology adoption that you figure out how to do that. And then I will say that, we'll pass the mic to Brooke in a minute, but a big pain point now in getting from POC to production is what are the right evals? What's the right level at which you're trying to evaluate? What are the metrics you care about? How do you set them up operationally? How do you feed data back from the production system that you've built and you have going at some scale back into the evals so you actually know what happened and you can improve things? So a lot of our customers are working hard on improving observability in evals today because they know the voice agents mostly work, but you want them to work better, and then you want to be able to peel off the next use case and the next use case and the next use case and go to production.
Expanding on that a bit, but trying to kind of look at it from a different scope, there are also a lot of infrastructure and just organizational problems to resolve when you actually want to deploy a voice agent to production. Like in your demo, you may just use like a WebRTC daily, for example, but for a lot of contact centers, for example, they use a huge smorgasbord of like different systems you need to integrate it with, the most basic one being the contact center itself, which is often, it's often not even a cloud system. It's something they have deployed on-prem, for example, Avaya or a Cisco, and that usually has a lot of pain points that you need to resolve to actually really make it work in their production setup. And it's not just enough to really to make the phone call with the AI agent work. You then have to think about the workflow, like what happens if it transfers to a human? How can it carry over the context to the human? Do you maybe even need to do stuff like warm transfer? So warm transfer means the AI agent waits for the human to join the conference, then maybe directly talks to the human agent to give them the context, and only then leaves the call so the caller can talk with the human agent. But there are all kinds of these infra problems to resolve that are often related with legacy infrastructure of your customers, of your contact centers that you may not even have thought about or may not even have known have existed. And going a bit beyond infrastructure, but still with the same theme, you didn't know what you didn't know. There's a lot of unknowns you encounter when you actually deploy a voice agent to production. And usually, like just to give one example that we didn't think of before we actually heard this, we see quite a few calls where the caller isn't actually talking to the AI agent. They're talking to their spouse in the background. They're asking for some information, but AI agent still responds because we never really considered this case before. So we have to find some way to deal with it. And all kinds of these unknowns kind of mean that there's a kind of a huge gap between demo and production. And in fact, I would say that the gap has actually become larger. It's very easy to build a demo, but it has become harder to go into production because the expectation is also much higher now. Like previously, like a simple flow-based IVR was sufficient, but now there's a huge expectation on the AI agent. Sorry, I'll cut myself off here, but maybe one more thing is because of these unknowns, one kind of experience we've had is it's often much better to start with a simple use case, first bring it to production, then iterate on that, rather than trying to like boil the ocean, as some people say, and try to do too much at once and then it fails. You lose the trust of your customers. You generally you can't make it work also because of dynamics within the customer. So always start with a simple use case and then go from there.
I think this dynamic is really interesting because when we first started trying to sell this stuff too early, a year and a half ago, the reaction from large enterprises was, oh, we're going to be super conservative about this. We're going to do this one little thing. And I was like, okay, that's great, but like, let's like look at what we can really do for you to bring value. Now it's almost the opposite in kind of a shocking way. And I think it's partly because of the consumer adoption of, ChatGPT and other tools. Often people say, oh, great, let's put it in production. And we've got these 10 things it's going to obviously be able to do. And we're like, well, the enterprise side of things is actually different from the consumer side. Let's take one use case at a time. So we've gone from being evangelists, which obviously I still am, to trying to help people go step by step and make sure that at each gate they're unequivocally successful.
Awesome. Next, I'll start with Karan and then go to you, Kwindla. But what's your opinion on the state of voice-to-voice models as opposed to, stitching together different approaches?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of optimism around having a single model run end-to-end conversation. And I think that optimism is good in the sense that we should be striving to have end-to-end models that can run conversations. However, I would say that after working with hundreds of customers, I think what we realized is that it's a lot harder to get these systems deployed because there are a lot of challenges in integrating back-end systems and tools and workflows that already exist with these end-to-end models, especially if the promise is that they take over all of the reasoning of the system, which I think is a little impractical today. So I think that's been a big challenge, which is, and our thinking has also evolved because of this. I think we feel like there's going to be sort of the need to build end-to-end models, but those models need to be highly conversational, but not necessarily handling all of the back-end reasoning. And they need to be very good at deflecting when necessary, integrating information, summarizing, explaining, being empathetic, being natural conversationalists, and then keeping the lights on for whoever the user is on the other side. But I don't think they necessarily need to be forked off of a frontier model that is good at solving IMO problems, right? Like I think that's a very different skill set. And so I think sort of all of the real-time APIs are really these veered in this uncanny valley of being like pretty smart at an unusual set of things that are not very useful to build actual voice agents that go to production. So I would say I'm very optimistic. We're working on end-to-end models too, but I think we're taking a little bit more of a product backward lens on it. What will actually get this to production?
If you listen carefully, you will remember that I reserved my what's not real answer earlier. Speech-to-speech models are not real today. With great apologies to all of my friends who are working very hard in the big labs at building great speech models, you should not be using speech-to-speech models in production today, except for very limited, specific, targeted use cases. And I don't think that's going to change for a couple years. All of us think that speech-to-speech models are a big part of the future, but they are not smart enough today. And what you care about in almost all enterprise use cases are primarily instruction following and tool calling reliability. And if you don't have those, you will have so much pain. And then the second thing that's not obvious is, and I think Karan was touching on this, you really have to have observability in production. You have to have all the hooks that you can install to understand what's working, what's not, what's fast, what's slow. Speech-to-speech models are a complete black box. And when we work with these deep learning models, as programmers, we're already working with too many black boxes. And if you put all the black boxes in one black box, you have no way of knowing how to improve things, even if you can guess when they're not working, which is probably not true. So I love speech-to-speech models as a hobbyist, if you want to call it that, but don't use them in production.
Yeah, I would say, I hired Quinn to be my hype man. I think observability is definitely great for being able to see if it, try it, see if it works for a use case. I think their voice AI is evolving so fast. But something else I would say is that actually being able to, being able to run in production. But I think also it's a bit of a false choice between full end-to-end and this cascading model. I think what's more realistically how it's going to evolve is that different models along the chain will merge together. I think DeepGram recently released Flux, which is kind of combining VAD and the transcription layer. I think people are thinking a lot about how could you use real-time to be able to just power the speech recognition to LLM, but then adding guardrails and then TTS at the end of that. I think that's a more realistic future of how different models are evolving. You can kind of combine and separate out the parts that you care about, because then you still have that controllability. And again, that's exactly what happened with self-driving. Is over the past 10 years, all these models have combined and then separated again and then combined at every layer of the stack to kind of dial in what makes sense for different types of conditions. And I think we'll see that happen with voice AI.
That's right. It's such a great point. And to be just a little less didactic and a little more technical and practical, we have a bunch of customers who are now using Gemini 2.5 Flash as a model with no transcription on the real-time input side. So you send audio tokens into Gemini 2.5 Flash, you let it do reasoning, you have Cartesia do the voice output, you have a parallel transcription process happening while the main turn is going. You replace the audio tokens with text tokens for the next turn, and only the most recent turn is audio tokens. That's a really nice for late 2025 compromise, because you get the audio understanding of Gemini, which is fantastic. You get the roughly the same reasoning as Gemini in text mode, because you're only ever sending it a handful of audio tokens, relatively speaking. It's a perfect balance. Now, are we going to be doing that next year? Maybe not. Are we going to, really be depending on these LLMs to do more and more? Yes. But the frontier is moving. And as Brooke said, if you've got tooling and evals that lets you swap in different approaches and know whether they're working, that's how you stay ahead on that frontier.
Any other rebuttals for this hot topic? No, great. So next we're going to do a couple of round robins, speed runs with questions. And Karan, I'm going to start with you and then we'll inverse it. Where do you see the biggest potential gains when it comes to improving voice experience?
A majority of our customers are on text-to-speech, so we spend a lot of time obviously thinking about the experience side. I would say the number one place where we can improve people's lives is voice selection and choosing the right voice for the right use case. That has been probably the single biggest issue that my team has spent a bulk of their time solving over the last 12 months. So I think that's one area where we think there should be better practice and best practice, and we're trying to build more of a coherent understanding of what makes voices good in specific contexts, specific languages, and how do you measure and provide recommendations to users so that they can take better decisions, because it has a real impact on the overall experience. Because the only thing that you hear, there's a lot of stuff happening in the background, like LLMs, tools, et cetera, et cetera. But the only thing the person's hearing on the other end of the line is the voice. So you have to get it right. And that's why we spend a ton of time on that, I would say.
Kind of taking a different step, like more on the front of the voice processing, I would actually say tone detection, interruption handling, that is one of the big problems to really have a smooth conversation with a voice agent. And there have actually been a lot of improvements recently. DeepCram's Flux model was already mentioned that combines kind of ASR plus tone detection. But like if you just do it naively, where you just like do a voice activity detection, there are often cases that really don't work at all. Like if you spell out numbers, you leave much larger gaps between the numbers than in your normal conversation. And these kind of more dynamic, actually modeled tone detection models, these have actually been the biggest improvements to the voice experience we've seen in the short-term past. And we think actually they're going to become the standard.
Yeah, I think tone detection has been like relatively underinvested in compared to, I think, text-to-speech and speech-to-text have been around for a lot longer, whereas like tone detection is a newer thing for real-time systems. I think that's generally a trend across voice AI, is that a lot of these things that were relevant before real-time systems were possible, kind of, I think like TTS was like still useful even without LLMs. Transcription was still useful even without LLMs, but a lot of these things that string everything together is missing. And I think sharing context across the whole system is one of the biggest missing pieces. Like today, the TTS has no idea what like the input was, what the like, if the user is frustrated, if they're speaking really quickly, or if they're speaking slowly, or like these
switching between the models, because it does get very confused.
Yeah, we are actually launching a model at the end of this month, and that's going to be really improving code switching, which is one of the key things we see in a lot of multilingual applications, where typically there's a bilingual need, like you have Spanish, Spanglish, English, Singlish, lots of these pairs, and you want to be able to seamlessly switch between a pair. That's one problem we're working on. And then separately, because we're working on, transcription systems and end-to-end models, like how do you sort of interpret when people are switching between different languages? That's the other side. Like especially, there can be pretty heavy accents in some cases. But we'll have a solution to the synthesis problem in 4 weeks. And then for the understanding problem, we're working on it.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll have benchmarks out for the Cartesia models when they come out. But I think on the evaluation side of these, this is definitely something that you can do. There's one of like saying whether or not it did the right thing, but you can also look for tracking things like corollary metrics. So like were there two languages present in the transcript, and like then running evaluations like did it complete the transcript, did it complete the task? But that can start to give you indications of like why it might have failed. And then I think also just like running standard evals on like appointment scheduling and whatnot, like and scaling those and being able to look at like overall percentages, like what types of conversations are failing. But yeah, I think this is a hard problem that probably is more at the model layer right now than it is at like the eval layer. I think catching it is probably where you want to spend most of the time, and then actually like feeding that back to the model providers, because I think that's, well, I will speak for Karan, but like I think a lot of that feedback, because we're so early, there's so many, probably your problems are very similar to the problems of other people in voice, and I know that a lot of the model providers have said like actually showing your use case, people can actually hill climb on those use cases.
Please sell us your data.
Yeah, sell your data.
Hi, my name is Joyce. I'm an AI agent PM. I think one of the reasons why we use voice is because that's like a very natural way to interact with LLMs and models. I'm curious about like your hot takes, or maybe your wild thoughts of like how might human AI interaction change in the future if it's not going to be voice. Maybe for Kwindla and anyone else.
For the purposes of the panel, at least. I mean, before Daily, I founded the company that did the gestural interfaces in the Film Minority Report. So I'm a big believer in spatial interfaces and multimodal interaction in general. I will say that I think we have plenty of work to do on voice now because there are so many amazing possibilities for talking to software. And I think, beyond the enterprise use cases we've talked about here today, I think we're just going to talk to the digital system we have. Consumers, embedded devices, software on our Macs and other platforms, and the systems that run in the cloud are just going to evolve to be voice as the primary input. So I think there's a lot to focus on there. Super quickly on the multilingual stuff, LLMs are amazing and they do things you don't necessarily expect. We have customers who are running 2 transcription models in parallel, tagging them, feeding both to the LLM and saying, you figure it out. You can iterate on the prompting, and in some use cases that actually works. And I think it's a good reminder that you should push on the LLM, because as often as it disappoints you, it can surprise you. And would never have thought of that before really digging into these systems over several, the last couple of years. But you can give the LLM stuff that would be junk to a human or hard for a human. And if you tag and prompt right, it will do things with that structured data that are very surprising.
Maybe going a bit into the multimodality and kind of ways to interact with the systems. In my personal life, I don't actually use voice that much, and I also don't really like the chat agents that are pure chat agents you can just chat with and that don't use anything. For example, on a website, just the chat agent doesn't use any of the refined experience you already have on the UI. So what I actually believe more would be useful is kind of a smooth transition, go to the mode that's appropriate at a certain point of time. For some things, like for example, a map, the UI map is just the most useful. It's not useful to describe a map in text or in voice. For very kind of dynamic interactions where I need fast feedback on a specific question, voice is really the best modality. And I think it's really a question about how do you make the transition smooth so you can use what's best for the use case at a certain point of time.
Can we put the mic right up here? Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. So one question I have is, as you all think about your most strategic and savvy buyers that you've interacted with so far, and you think about what business processes they're really focusing in on right now given the current state, and how they're changing their tech stacks to be resilient and adaptable for what the future state you're expecting is going to become, what questions are they asking you? What are they focusing in on, and how are they approaching those questions?
All right, so let me get started. I think it depends a bit on the type of the buyer. Like in the very early conversation, there's often a huge bias to just what's the vibe of the voice you hear. Do I like the voice? And then there's a huge emphasis on that portion. And that is something we need to solve. And often we've unfortunately found that there's a gap between what works best in a demo, what works best in production, especially when it comes to stability, a very emotional voice on the one hand and very stable but not super emotional voice on the other. But then there's a lot of different stakeholders we usually encounter, but eventually always we get to the questions about reliability, around hallucinations, around what kind of mechanisms do you have to ensure that it stays within the bound I define, that I want to define. And that's actually usually where we spend the most time with them to really determine what actually kind of boundary do they want. Some customers are actually more on for them actually kind of traditional IVRs work best in the sense that they have such strict requirements that even a fancy voice agent, when you actually define it according to their requirements, gets to a very strict flow. We do want to discourage that, but for some customers, we can't convince them that they shouldn't go this approach. That wouldn't be a good experience. And over time, we try to kind of find a way, kind of a middle ground there. So, sorry, I'm going a lot of details into this, but that's usually kind of the two things we encounter. First, just how does the voice sound to me? What's the vibe of the voice? But then when it's actually becomes serious, there's going to be a lot of questions about reliability, hallucinations, kind of making sure that your brand isn't damaged.
Yeah, I think something else, because we actually work with both buyers and vendors. So if you're building a voice solution, but also if you're looking at different voice solutions and want to understand which ones you should do. And I think the best, or what we've seen work best for buyers is actually like before you go into a bake off or a pilot, actually thinking hard about like what you're trying to get out of it. I think so often we see people start, and I'm sure Cresta and Pipecat, you guys both see this, is like, people are like, I want a voice agent to handle everything. And then they run the voice agent, and you're like, okay, did it work? And they're like, I don't know. And you're like, well, did you listen to a bunch of calls? And then it's ultimately up to, I think, to your point of the Steve Jobs quote of whether or not the CEO or the decision maker listened to some calls and it went well. But really what I think we spend a lot of time is like pushing for thinking about what are your KPIs, like what does it mean to be successful? What are you looking at in these conversations and how are you measuring that over time? And also like iterating as you're deploying an agent, because I think different than just traditional B2B SaaS, you don't just flip on a switch and it works, but you're actually iterating on the deployment, on like different strategies, on what knowledge you're feeding it. On a lot of things are like controllable on the business side.
Okay, for the last question, we're going to go in the corner over here.
All right. Thanks for the great panel. I have two questions, one for Karan and one for Kwindla. So first, Karan, I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about is multilingual models gonna be able to cover all those nuances in accents? The reason why I'm asking this is because we're building in French. We tried Cartesia a couple months ago. It's heavily towards French from France. And that's a turnoff for our market. So we had to turn to something else. So any supports that you guys are doing towards that?
Yeah, I think the model release that we're doing this month, it's very focused on multilingual. And dialects is a big part of that. Obviously, with French, you have many different types of French accents and dialects, including, obviously on the Canada side and then France, Africa, et cetera. So I think we've been sort of slowly expanding the set of dialects we can support. Obviously, we started with core sort of French, and even there's a lot of nuance, right? Like Southern accents, et cetera. So I think working with customers, there's been a lot of demand to go more granular. And so I think this model, especially, I think will make a huge improvement in terms of dialect faithfulness. And then I think once we get feedback, I think we're going to do another pass, right? So I think it's one of those things you have to get to the 99.99%, you have to, make a big pass, go out, try a bunch of stuff, see how it sticks, and then do another full pass on the model. So hopefully it'll be a lot better for your use case. That's what I would say. Give it a try on November 1st.
Will do, thanks. And question for Kwindla. Our team loves Pipecat. We're building on Pipecat, so just two questions about Pipecat. First, is it still going to be open source in the long term? So that's the first question. And then the second question is, what are the long-term kind of vision or differentiation they can share between Pipecat and LiveKit?
100% open source. I mean, we wouldn't have released all that code as an open source ecosystem unless we wanted it to be a vibrant community that is completely open source. I mean, the thing I say to people is there are more people using Pipecat directly with Twilio than are using Pipecat with Daily. And we're happy about that. It means that the ecosystem is healthy. It means that it's going to grow. The pressure's not all on Daily employees to make Pipecat great. It's on everybody who uses it. We love PRs. I think Pipecat's the only really open source framework. So there's no lock into any part of the Pipecat stack. You can use any models. You can use any network transport layer. There's a ton of client-side SDKs that other people contribute to and libraries that are sort of community libraries around Pipecat. And that's a flywheel. And I think if you're building on a healthy open source ecosystem, that flywheel of continued improvement from the community is one of the really nice benefits.
Concludes our panel. All of the companies here are hiring and looking at customers. So if you heard something that you like here, please find the founders after in the networking session. And as a next step, I'm going to invite the Cresta team up here for a short demonstration from them. And thank you guys.